Hello, everyone, and welcome to my podcast. Today I'm on with Michael, whom I met through Ramdas Maui's satsang group on Facebook, or Open Heart Satsang, I think. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh man, it's absolutely my pleasure and an honor, really.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm so glad. I saw last night you shared something really beautiful that I would love to bring up here in a little bit.
Oh yeah.
But first, I just kind of wanted to ask you how your life and spiritual journey began, developed, maybe how your childhood went and just all of what brought you to where and who you are today.
Yeah. Well, it's been a long ride, man. I'm 35. A few days ago, actually, my birthday was on the 10th, and it started with a overwhelming sense of dissatisfaction with life. Really, it came from suffering. Um, I I was unhappy as a teen. I was doing a lot of drugs, obviously. I'd been prescribed Adderall, so I was chasing this dragon of, oh, I can actually read books now and things. I've been struggling with ADD pretty much all my life. And I ended up finding something in a mushroom trip. I had a moment of retrospection and a moment of like disassociation where I was watching water fall down a drain and it was spiraling. And I was like, oh wow, it's all grand spirals. This is how reality works. And I noticed that I was rocking, like I was rocking like a crazy person in a shower. And I was like, uh-oh, yeah, I might be losing my grip on reality. And in that moment, I had seen my looking, or I'd watched my observation, and it just all fell away. It would just went completely still, and I was present, just here, 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 here. Uh, and it was absolutely beautiful. But after about 4 or 5 hours of not experiencing that trip anymore, it faded away, and it drove me insane. Like I had to find it. Like where is that stillness? Um, and I eventually found it again through nitrous oxide and a lot of drugs, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, later after that experience. So a lot of self-destructive behavior. I'd had a kid with my ex-wife, and it was a really bad situation, really, really abusive. And had been told that I was having another child with this lady, and it was a nightmare for me. Like I was like, oh my God, like what the fuck am I doing with my life? So in a in this really desperate situation, I had a giant industrial tank of nitrous oxide, and I just wanted to fade away, just go. So I was letting go and letting go, letting go. And in nitrous oxide, I don't know if you've ever done it, but it's like a completely disassociative state. That's why dentists use it for their Novocaine and or their what do they call it? Anesthesia. Because you're disassociated, everything feels okay. You're well, it's kind of like that overwhelming feeling of peace that you feel in a non-dual state. You're just like, whatever, it's fine. It's okay.
Yeah.
So I was just trying to fade away, and I eventually did, man. I'd just gone to black. It all stopped, and I felt like I was like in this abyss for thousands of years. Like it just felt like gone, and I was gone, and it was gone, and nothing existed, and I got yanked out of that state by a friend who was trying to save me, which thank God he did. And I eventually got fired from that job. Thank God that happened too. um, and, and a few weeks after that, I had seen it really. Like I had felt it in my soul and in my heart, and I knew what that stillness was. So I could kind of turn to it again, but it wasn't real for me. Like I didn't have anything to define it. And then I found a book called Be As You Are by Ramana Maharishi. And well, it
Wow.
wasn't by him; it's by a guy named David Godman. But it's a Q&A between Ramana and his students. And his students would ask him a question, Ramana would answer. And what it did was he set it up to where I could see my mind and I could see what Ramana was trying to show me, and it just happened. And he set up a metaphor of a movie. He was saying that your senses are like a movie playing on a screen, and you aren't those senses. You're the observer sitting in a seat, just watching, just observing. And in reality, you're not even that observer. You're the space that the seat is held within. And there, it was just like, oh, fuck, it's done. I'm done. All gone. Um, and I wanted to kick my own ass, honestly, because it was so simple. Like, it's all right here, right in front of me this whole time, right here, right here, right here. Uh, that was 14, 13 years ago. Yeah. And ever since, I've been pretty still, pretty blank. I've got 3 kids, and I'm a cable guy now. I I use my cable guy job as kind of my sadhana. I'm trying to become a mirror for people, and I'm serving them in their own house, and just being that conduit every day, as much as I can, at least.
Yeah, wow, that's beautiful. And one of the things you were saying about just being here now, which you had shared in the post yesterday, which I wrote down a note for, but you said you can't ever be anywhere other than in this present moment. And if you can stay totally in that moment. And I remember Alan Watts used to say the only thing left after enlightenment is a good laugh because you see that everything was here all along.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I love what you shared because about the psychedelic experiences and the second one, it sounded like going into what might be called the void, but totally outside of time and space,
Yeah.
into that formless aspect. And also how you shared about finding Ramana's book after is really beautiful because I think sometimes people have these experiences with psychedelics, and sometimes if there's no context and no like spiritual understanding, people don't really know what happened some of the time. And if they don't
100%.
inquire as much as you, they're like, oh, that was really cool, and then kind of just forget about it and just go live their life again as if that experience hadn't really happened.
Either that or it sends them into a spiral, and they start dealing with like psychosis and
Right. Right.
dissociative personality disorder and things like that. Yeah, yeah, it's very destabilizing, honestly. I I know that if I didn't set myself up to understand what it was, I would have been a mess. Yeah, I could not have been a father or anything like that. I would have definitely gone to a monastery and just done that trip, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really important that context of having a base and a foundation and of under even Ramdas used to say the same thing when he read the Tibetan Book of the Dead. He said, "Oh wow, this is talking about what I've been experiencing with this
Exactly.
LSD. Like it makes sense now."
Yep. Exactly.
But yeah, and I also struggled with substances. I started using and snorting Adderall at a very young age, mixed with like benzos and that kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and but during it, I did have yeah, that was like my thing. A few experiences too with psychedelic substances that inadvertently kind of broke through. I remember having done LSD once and going to a baseball game the next day with my dad and telling him how everything in the universe is one and there's a perfect connection between all things, and I didn't really know what I was talking about, and he definitely didn't know what I was talking about, but and plus I was so addicted to drugs at the time, but I seen something, I seen
Hmm.
like how there were these strands of energy that just run through everything all the time, and
Absolutely.
it's all interrelated.
Yeah.
But
That
yeah,
Indra's
thank you
net
for
thing, right?
yeah. Can you tell
Yeah.
us about that?
Oh, okay. So I've seen it. It's always here, and it's always I feel like it's the momentum of reality itself. Like it's the thing that binds our karma together. It's kind of like what we're existing within. I always like to think of reality itself as kind of this infinite void meeting infinite momentum. So it's like we exist between the two opposites in the paradox, and it's all just fading away as they meet. This Indra's net idea is really this idea that we're all interconnected as one being, one existence, kind of emanating through reality and interplaying with one another to unwind the karma that's been built up, or maybe build more. It's kind of hard to tell. Um, but I've seen it mostly on high doses of psychedelics and in deep states of samadhi, but like it's just another state, just another realization, just another vision. I'm curious what you saw though. Like I found that everybody kind of ascribes different colors, different feelings and stuff. So how did you see this interconnectedness?
Well, as far as with the psychedelic, the most profound experience I had was after I had been completely clean and sober for
Mm-hmm.
about 6.5 years,
Yeah,
and completely devoted to what I do now, to my spiritual path. And then I
absolutely.
felt the calling to do these mushrooms. And so it had been a long time without anything, and I did 7 grams of mushrooms, which is a lot, and to do just alone, and I just did it alone. And what I first experienced was a tremendous suffering. It
Mm,
was I understood what the Buddha talked about with the wheel of birth and death with samsara, and I seen it from that aspect, like that frequency, the frequency of um the pain of like repeated death and rebirth, and how what beings think they're doing to get free often mires us further in it, and that kind of thing, and how so few escape into awareness, back into the self. And
mm.
so I was seeing it, and it was brutally painful. I was crying, and I was like, why did we make it like this? And because I knew it was like us, like I wasn't thinking
Yeah,
like someone's doing it. I was like, why is this like this? So I was
yeah.
really miserable. And then but I knew it was like supposed to be happening. Like it was, and I carry that ever since, because it gave me such a deep insight into suffering, and into compassion and all of this. But then I went into the
Mm.
shower, and I had this experience of, I felt like I was my grandfather, who was my dad's dad, who I never
Yeah.
met, but who had died while drinking very heavily, and
Mm.
had some, I think, pretty bad like demons coming up in him at the end of his life.
Sure.
And so I felt like I was him, and I felt all his pain, and it was more suffering,
Mm.
and I could feel it all. But then something changed, and it came to me that he was okay, and that everything was okay. And then at that moment, I saw how a lifetime, like a human life, was a finger snap in eternity, but in a liberating way. And I literally snapped my finger, and I ran out of the shower in joy, and I seen how everything was perfect all the time, and I
Yeah, man.
all that. So it was really interesting. So it wasn't so much like a seeing outer things, but it was interesting, because it was like all the suffering was right there, but then also eternity, and that the oneness and the peace and freedom was right there too.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I've anytime I've seen that interconnectedness, I've almost always had past life flashes. And they've always been really fucking traumatic, man. Like always been really, really brutal. Like I watched one where we were in like some primitive war. We were probably like Mesopotamian or something. And my best friend had been kicked to the ground, and I was being held and just watching him being tortured. And then my throat was slit, and I was like watching him die in front of. It was like really fucking bad, man.
Wow.
And others was rape, drowning, starving to death, burning to death, being trapped. I still have this weird thing where I can't, like claustrophobia is kind of hard for me, which is fun. I deal with that a lot. Um, but it's always not been a great experience. And every time I've kind of like come into it, it's seeing that it's okay, that all of that experience is kind of just meant to be here. Like all of it was just to be here. And that's beautiful, man.
Wow.
I've definitely found that there's like this grand liberation, I don't know, relief, that comes with that, knowing that it's all just kind of coming together. All the suffering, all the pain and disease is just to be here. Very, very beautiful, for sure.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. There's this quote I love that says, "Nothing happens next. This is it." It's like, yeah, this is it.
That's beautiful.
But what
Fuck,
you
man,
said,
I'm gonna
yeah, I
use
mean,
that.
yeah, I always remind myself that. I'm like, this is it. But how you said, and it all led up to this moment. And yeah, I think with your claustrophobia, or I've met people that are like, I'm afraid to be around knives. I think something's happened to me before with knives. And it's interesting because the Buddha himself says, and it's one of my favorite quotes about samsara. He says, "You shed more blood from being slaughtered." He's like, "than all the water in the four great
Exactly.
oceans." And so that was what happened to me on the trip. It was like I seen it from the bigger perspective. And it's like holding what you said, that really nothing is happening, and all's here and now, and it's okay. But then from the separateness perspective,
Mm-hmm.
also realizing that there is immense suffering that goes on, that even though ultimately maybe illusion still seems very real, and still, like Ram Dass said, we still work to alleviate that suffering in ourselves and others as best as we can. But I love
Yeah.
how you brought that up, because it really gives you an insight into the nature of the whole thing, a bigger perspective.
Well, it is pointing to that bigger perspective, because once we see that all of those past lives, or all of the culminations of experiences that we've had to endure to get to here, is really to be here, it's all okay after that. It now can be whatever it needs to be, and you're just falling into it. You can embrace this too, because you know that it's meant to happen.
Yeah, just like all the rest of it, right? And that's cool, because it's not just saying all that was meant to be, but this right now is meant to
Yes,
be.
exactly.
And I
Exactly.
just read a Ramana Maharshi quote where he said, "True humility is accepting things as they are."
Mm, yeah, yeah. I think I was reading Chud, which is a like overview over of like bodhicitta in Tibetan traditions, and it was explaining that, well, that presence is unconditional love. That acceptance is the only way to deal with here and now in equanimity. Because if you don't accept it, you have aversion or fear, or you even become attached to good feelings or bad feelings, and that just spins up the whole game. You start twisting your mind around nonsense instead of just existing.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
the biggest challenge I've had recently, which maybe you can shed some light on. I know you talked a little bit in your post yesterday about how unworthiness, fear, and all of that you said this is it too.
Yeah.
And suffering and the grace that it is a part of the puzzle, which is very cool, because what I've been feeling into is a lot about death, and with my attachment to the separate entity of myself and Alex and his thoughts, and also extremely with my pets, especially because my dog, who I'm very, very close with is not sick even, but just getting older. And what I've experienced is ever since I went to this Rinzai Zen Buddhist retreat 3 years ago, and I'm going back in 2 weeks actually, but since I went the first time and met the Roshi, whenever I take naps, whenever I sleep, when I come in and out, like right on the edge of consciousness, I stay aware of myself. Not when I'm really in the void, but as I'm coming back from it, I'm very aware of the timelessness and of the infinity and the passing nature of the life. But because of the attachment or clinging of mind that I have,
You
I
lose it.
often come back with the sadness because of the fleeting nature of this life and my attachments in this life. And that's been a very hard thing for me to work. It's been the hardest thing I've really had internally to work with the past few years, because normally, because all the practices I do and my devotion and staying with the mantra and in the spirit, most of the time the mind is, not that there's not challenges, but pretty clear and very connected and often open in love and beautiful connections with people. But this one area, which I feel like you said in the post, is a piece of the puzzle, is significant, but I haven't been yet able to fully see my way through it.
Unfortunately, that attachment to other beings. I mean, I have 3 kids. It's very hard to let that go. And the only way to really test yourself is by either one, you know, bringing it up in mind and holding it in your heart and just playing with that idea of loss. You know, what would it be like if I lost them? How would I react? How am I going to, accommodate this funeral? Make it real for yourself, and you can play with that feeling, that stickiness. I had to lose my kids in a divorce. I was a stay-at-home dad for 5 years, and I was homeschooling and doing the whole thing. So it was a full-time dad position.
Oh, wow.
I never had a break. So in my divorce, I lost everything. I mean, I started from negative 20K in the hole with a car payment and phone payment and all that stuff. So I started from scratch.
Wow.
And dude, there was just such a tremendous feeling of loss, of like, oh, I've just wasted my entire life on nothing. Like all of this hard work just culminated into scratch.
Yeah.
And that realization that all of that hard work was actually just so you could experience the loss of that hard work. It's almost like that quote from Krishna in Gita, where he says, do your best and don't attach to the fruits of your labor. That really is pointing to just exist in this moment, but be the best person you can be. Because once you start becoming attached to my role as a father, or my role as a stay-at-home dad, or my role as a chef, or blah, 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 it all becomes really, really dangerous to lose, because you lose your self-identity. And your self-identity is this illusion that makes you feel like you're worthy of something, or that you're supposed to be here, and it really is, it's nonsense. It's really stupid. But that that happens
stupid.
because exactly. It happens because we think that our role is important, or that it's bringing us some kind of joy, or we think a lot of things, but it's really just attachment to anything but here and now. It's like legitimizing the ego, in a sense.
Yes, legitimizing the ego. Almost, I was reading something too recently, maybe in a Sargadatta Maharaj, saying the ego keeps creating these desires, or these looking at these fears, or whatever can keep it going, whatever can keep it solidified so it can hang on to this. And that's what I feel like for me. It's like, as I get deeper into my sadhana into the self, then this other part of me wants to cling on however it can. And I remember once, since we've been talking about psychedelics a little bit, I had smoked DMT, and that was also after I've been sober for a long time. And I did it once that morning, and it didn't work because I like didn't do enough or something. And then I did it again later that night, and I immediately shot out into this whole different, maybe astral plane of some other universe, where I remember it was incredible what I could see, and it was pink and purple lights, and I remember they were alive but not alive like how we are. And I remember I'd never be able to tell anyone. I was thinking, but I was so afraid, like I'd never be able to explain it, but I was so afraid because it was as if my consciousness had shot out into that, and it didn't know where it was. Like there was no. And then I remember having a couple thoughts, and the ego being like, thank God I still have my thoughts, because I like I'm not totally lost. I still have so that's such an example, like you're saying it, of absurdity, but feeling that even though the thoughts are nothing and they're not what I am, like that sense of I need to still have these because that's my identity.
I've come to the realization that ego is really just a comfort-seeking mechanism, and I think it develops when we're babies, when we're crying for whatever the fuck, and we're just not having that need met. So we figure out a way to disassociate from this moment and try to like wrap up in an idea or imagination or something like that. It's a tricky little bitch, man. Ego is annoying in a sense that like you can't catch it. You can't grab a hold of it. You'll chase your tail for years if you try. It's really about not trying. It's about letting go, surrender, the opposite of doing. And that's just so counterintuitive for Westerners, especially because we're kind of trained to like do, achieve, get, become. And all those things are backwards. It's real backwards. And it's a hard one to break for sure. I did 20 grams of mushrooms last time I did a heavy trip. And I ended up in my bathtub. It was a hot bath, and I was grabbing onto my collarbones like oh shit handles. Like I was like creating worlds and watching them fade to ash. I was having like a full-on Brahma experience, you know? It was like creating universes and watching it just fall away. Like almost becoming frustrated at the Shiva aspect of like that devouring. Like, oh my God, why do I keep creating things if it's just gonna fucking die? And then there was just like oh shit, why do I keep doing anything if it's just gonna fade away? And oh, it's all done. I'm done. And then it just all stopped again. Have you ever had a timeless experience in a sense that like time stopped, or anytime you tried to like project into time, it didn't happen?
No, the only timeless experience I had in that sense was the one I talked about with the finger snap, but I don't think in the sense of what you're saying, although I'm completely following the train of what you're saying. And it makes, I was actually about to bring up Shiva and the destruction, so there you have it. But no, I don't think so. I don't think
Interesting. I've always kind of drawn parallels between Shiva and Buddha, like this emptiness that pervades reality itself. And I'm not sure if that's really like the Hindu concept of Shiva. It's just kind of like my own little projection.
Way of seeing it.
But the nothingness that pervades reality itself, like the space that embraces everything. I've come to find that like I feel more of that as myself than the matter that I embody.
It reminds me of Rumi says how strange and perverse our fear of emptiness, because that's what we actually are. So it's like we are the space, and And even in our own life, we could think of it as the silence before the thoughts. And
Yeah.
that's when I started realizing those parallels. All thoughts come first from silence. And so what we are at the core is that formless, that spaciousness, that silence. And really, it is absurd to fear the loss of the matter because, like in your Brahma experience, we can always create matter over and over again. But the reason I was going to bring up the Shiva is because you had spoken about your own life being destroyed and seeming like it was for nothing. And
Mm-hmm.
that reminded me of the correlation between that universal aspect of that. And that's the grand scale of everything being
Yeah,
for nothing and just
exactly.
destroying. And so, but it's
Exactly.
liberating, like you said, if you can see it a different way.
Yeah, it takes the onus of creation, of success off your shoulders because you know that, like, as long as you're doing your best, that's all you have to do. You can just let go of the rest because you know you've done your best. There's nothing else you could have done about it. Yeah, there's this just, oh, thank God it's over. That's, I don't need to actually succeed. And it's taken the
Yeah.
power away from my work. It's taken the power away from my wife, my children. Losing them is a loss in the sense that it would end a chapter of my life, but it's not a loss in the sense that it's taking something away from me, because nothing can be taken away. It's all here. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
there's definitely a freedom to that realization for sure. Mm.
Thank you. And what you had said in your post last night, because it was about the Maharaji named Curly Baba saying Ram worship Shiva. Shiva worship Ram, and they're one, and you have to get to Ram through Shiva. And one of the things you said is Shiva and Ram are one, form and formless are one, and God and incarnation are one, which I thought was really powerful and cool because just seeing that, maybe you could talk about it a little more, but about how God is also the incarnation.
Yeah, I I've always been kind of hesitant to say something like that because of the Christian ideals of, oh my God, what are you talking about? Like that's schizophrenic, man. But it really is. It comes from the realization of Sebek, all one. And if it's all one, then there's no removal, there's no disassociation, there's no way to not be one. And in oneness, that means that we're all God. But it takes away the specialness of God. You know, it takes away the mythos or the theology, because if it's all God, that means it's really mundane too. It's a pile of shit also.
Is also
It's
God.
all the suffering. It's the demons and the rats and the cockroaches and mosquitoes. Like it's everything. And I don't think it should change your worldview much at all, because realizing that it's all one means that it's just all here anyways. It's like
It's funny, yeah.
you can't experience something differently if you wanted to.
No, you're right. And it reminds me of Ramana Maharshi too. Was saying to a woman, he was like,
Mm.
you worship the family as God, you worship Krishna as God, you worship nature as, or whatever it was, nature as God. He said, why don't you just realize you too are the self and be done with it? He's like, you say you see the self and everything else, but he's like, just be done with it and see you're the self too. So that was kind of funny, I thought. Yeah.
Yeah, get it over with, man. Just take it all in. Taking
But
it
I think
all in.
that that's also for people listening. Like, to me, it gives a great feeling of comfort. Like you're saying, there's literally nowhere else you could be, and nothing
Hmm.
else you could be doing. And I think I always try to tell people that because when you're not very connected with the spirit, it's hard to see that because it just seems like things suck and all these things are happening and you're stressed. But really, it's like that all the time. But I know for me, my experience is that the more connected I am with everything, with the self, the more I see things happen in my outer
Mm.
world every day that show me there's no other possible place I could have been or thing I could have been doing.
Exactly.
Even though I thought I was choosing and deciding, it was just happening. It was happening
Exactly.
exactly the way it had to.
Yep. Yeah, I've definitely kind of come to the conclusion that free will is an illusion. That all the decisions I'm making, I mean, even the words, if I'm being honest, if I look, it's all just kind of emanating from nowhere. It's just kind of being spoken. There's no rhyme or reason. It's just kind of like the desire to fulfill some symbols that I feel could complete an idea or something like that. It's really interesting, and it's all coming from like this weird momentum of desire or attachment. Mm.
Yeah, I love you said that, because that's actually one of the biggest parts of what I love to share and teach about, is about that miss. Because to me, I think it's the ego that wants to say it has free will, because that's like its sense of, hey, I have free will, I'm choosing, I
I'm
control,
important.
I got this, and it'll cover that till the end, just seeing that, like you said, it's a spontaneous happening. And then even the ego thinking, even you thinking like I'm in control in this, is also part of it all too.
Exactly.
It's also part of it all too.
Exactly. Yeah, I non-dualism encompasses dualism completely. It has to. Yeah, a lot of people miss that. I found an interesting parallel, or well, really just a dislocation between Bhakti Yoga and Jnana Yoga, in the sense that form and formlessness are kind of considered two different things in these two ideas, and a lot of the friction comes from that disassociation between the two. I made a post earlier. It was about Maharaji and his ability to take a shitload of psychedelics and kind of just work with it. And I'd mentioned that the reason he can do that is because his awareness is totally absorbed in God. There's nothing that can be played on the movie of me that would really catch his attention. And finding that stillness to operate from is the key to working with reality itself, and not only working with reality itself, but seeing formlessness as self. Like seeing formlessness as this embodied nature that embraces, encompasses, and kind of is projected through form. And really, that is the whole message of this like Sebek, this God is one, is that formlessness is being projected through form, and they're all one interconnected thing happening in the world. The universe is happening, and it's all one. It's all love, man.
Yeah. It's all one. And that's what, when they say everything is love, or only love is infinite, it's the same as that awareness, that presence that is everything. And it also reminds me too, and because I know we're near election time in the United States, but I've also understood, when you understand that aspect, rather than getting so angry about if this happens or who controls, realizing that it's going to happen how it's going to happen, and whatever the effects of anything in the world is. When you look at like these bigger cycles, and like the yugas in Hinduism, and how we're in the Kali age, and the age of strife and discord, it's like these things are unfolding, and although we want to be engaged in them, we also want to develop some impersonality, some dispassion. So combining, like Ram Dass always talked about, the heart mind, like the bloody heart of Christ and compassion, with the wisdom of the Buddha and the wisdom of the mind, so that we can kind of balance these things out, still being engaged in the world, but having a wisdom and an awareness that it's unfolding
100%.
how it has to,
Yeah, I think that's kind of like the new American ideal, is kind of mixing these two, like open, all-encompassing, compassionate, unconditional love, and the the stillness of reality that embraces it all. It's really kind of just like this weird amalgam of bhakti and jnani. We're kind of half-assing both, but making it work in a really, really pleasant way.
Is that what you meant when you told me like a couple weeks ago, a new age of coming, kind of that
Yeah.
kind of thing?
Yeah, and I'm not the only one. You're obviously someone else who's kind of mixing the two and making it work.
Yeah.
I've met quite a few of us that are just dancing in emptiness and taking the bullshit and loving it too. It's very strange. I think Ramakrishna was probably like the role model for this kind of idea. He definitely laid the track of like, yes, but, or this and legitimized it as a path for people like Ram Dass. I mean, Ram Dass is a perfect example of what do you call himself? Spiritual debutante. I'm no different by any means. I definitely found that every tradition has keys, and obviously some are more apparent than others, and some are more readily available. Like you can read one book and find all the keys, or you could, have to spend 10 years in a tradition just to gain a little insight. I found that with Kabbalism, it's pretty rough. There's a lot of onboarding for terms and vocabulary. So
it's like learning a whole new system.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's not intuitive, which is kind of difficult for me. So I found Hermeticism pretty shortly after that, and I was like, oh shit, like this makes a lot of sense. And then I moved to Tibetan and Hindu and Taoist ideals, but it opens the door to this ability to accept everybody as experiencing their own truth. I think it kind of opens the door towards like this cohesive America, or this like cohesive union of your religion's right, my religion's right. Why are we fighting? Like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I think we need that pretty fucking desperately, to be honest with you.
Yeah, certainly. And you're right, Ramakrishna, who I was just looking at his picture before I walked down to start up this interview. He did teach so much of the oneness of all the traditions. And Ram Dass, that was what when I first started listening to his podcast, that was what I realized. I thought to myself, wow, this guy's saying everything that I felt in my heart, everything he's doing. And I feel so connected with him in my path. But I think that's also part of my calling, and obviously yours too, is to show people the oneness. I have this all one right on the wall here. I got from the Ram Dass retreat years ago. But what I found in all these world religions and traditions, kind of like I think Meister Eckhart said, theologians quarrel, but mystics speak the same language. And you find these incredible truths. And I was just reading a Rumi poem the other day. It's like when you, I'm paraphrasing, but when you meet an enlightened being, when you meet a being of the spirit, that lineage doesn't matter, religion doesn't matter. Exactly. You recognize it. And that's what I learned. I started reading and connecting with these great saints from all these different traditions. And I realized they all have it. They all know it. It didn't matter whether they grew up in the Eastern world or the Western world, or they were a Buddhist or Hindu or a Christian monk. It was the same thing.
Yeah, the only thing that varies is their vocabulary. Yeah, it's all the same message.
Talk about it.
Yeah, I've definitely found that in conversations with realized people, that there's a lot of like back and forth, and then we realize like, oh, that's what you meant. Like, oh, okay, I get it. Yeah, I know what you mean. So yeah, there's certainly this weird disconnect with vocabulary, but it's all the same summit, all the same realization. But there's also this weird, unique lens that every human kind of witnesses the Dharma through. So even though there it is like this one truth, one summit, we all view it differently. And I think that's why saints, like Neem Karoli Baba wasn't saying the Catholic Church is a piece of shit, or like no, the Dalai Lama isn't discouraging people from being Hindu. It's all different paths to realize the same summit. Like there's no reason to discourage other people for following a different path because it's their path. It's not yours. Like chill.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I do think each unique lineage and path has its special beauty, its tradition.
100%.
I feel some of them even go beyond just this planet or beyond just this age and are like a universal tradition. And yeah, it's an incredible and beautiful thing. Yeah. So I'm all for that. Always like letting people, and like you said, it's not, and that's one of the uniqueness. That's one of the most beautiful things about God in form is that the play is completely diverse and there's so many aspects to it.
Exactly.
And that's how it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So fascinating. Yeah, I've always been a student of any religion that found some kind of direct connection with God. When I was a teenager, I was an atheist. Well, agnostic atheist. More of just like, I don't believe anybody. They're all fucking stupid. So I'd gotten this idea that like, if anyone's going to figure out God, it's going to be me, right? I'll figure it out. I got this. So on a shitload of Adderall, I just started devouring every single book I could find, man. Anybody who claimed to talk to God, I was like, let's see. What the fuck you got to say? And I'd found quite a few really, really interesting ones. Like the Zoroastrian tradition has a book called the Zendavesta. The Hermetic tradition has the Corpus Hermeticum. The Buddhists obviously have the Mahayana and the Theravadan. And there's just so many really, really very profound gems hiding in plain sight. And I think it's really interesting because we have like this ability to find these magic words, like Corpus Hermeticum in a Google bar will change your fucking life, but no one knows it.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating that it's all right here, but everyone chooses to remain comfortable. And that's it. Comfort seeking.
Yes. Ram Dass used to say that the secrets of mysticism aren't actually secrets in the sense that they're being hidden. He said they're being screamed from the rooftops. It's just if you have the ears to hear. But
exactly.
The sense of, can you say a little more about that? The sense of staying comfortable.
Yeah. Well, I think the whole reason we have an ego, well, there's not a reason, it's biology, but the whole like mechanism of egoism is to have temporary moments of reprieve, to have comfort when shit's uncomfortable. And it of course comes to bite us in the ass because we become desperate for comfort. We have to find relief. And I think that's this survival mechanism that's been deeply ingrained in our biology because what we are is primates existing on a planet. And we have biological needs like food and sex and water and clean air and all that stuff. So we have these modalities that our mind seeks specific material gains to relieve a biological function or biological need that's making us uncomfortable. But it also applies to our mental states. Like we've kind of confused our biological needs with emotion. Like if you're hungry, you start feeling cranky. Or if you're sad, you'll feel dehydrated, or like there's like these weird biological mechanisms that we've ingrained within our minds that associate discomfort and suffering with desperation, with this resistance and aversion. And I think the modern world has really created the ability to not feel uncomfortable for long enough that we become highly sensitive to discomfort in a way that no generation before us has ever experienced. So we, especially the modern Western human, have these tactics, these modalities that make us desperate to fulfill some kind of behavior pattern, or desperate to relieve some kind of feeling that we feel inside of us, even though that uncomfortable kind of sensation isn't going to kill us, and it isn't going to make us any less of a human or anything like that. We're really seeking that comfort because we can't be uncomfortable, not because it's dangerous or anything like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's why some things, for me, going to that the Rinzai Zen Buddhist monastery for 7 days is powerful, because you only sleep 4.5 hours a night. It's very strict. You meditate 10 hours a day. They yell at you, if you do something wrong, and it's very challenging to the ego. And I've also noticed that I like to walk barefoot a lot, and it's a huge, I think, part of my soul. Even when I'm in India, I'll go completely barefoot for 16 days, whatever I do, or even if I'm hiking in Sedona, Arizona, or in the mountains in Tennessee. And it's so interesting because in America, when I've done that, sometimes it makes people so angry. I've been called stupid. Like, it triggers something in people. I'll be on a hike, and even like 70-year-old women, and they'll be like, "Are you stupid?" or like 50-year-old men and like a 30-year-old guy, and yelling, and then I just smile at them, and I don't know if it teaches them something or not, but somehow my not having shoes triggers something in people's minds, because it seems out of the ordinary, or they wouldn't do it or couldn't do it
100%.
to where it upsets them like greatly. It's interesting. Yeah, it's very interesting. But anyway, so thank you so much. Before we start to wrap things up, I wanted to maybe finish talking about compassion a little bit. And I see what looks like a sun behind you. And you were mentioning to me earlier about rain and the sun being examples of compassion. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
I always found that the most beautiful metaphors for this unconditional love aspect of God, or of reality, is the metaphor of rain or sun kind of spreading its light, or watering, quenching the thirst of anything, no matter how evil, no matter how fucked up or unworthy it feels. It's going to get rained on. It's going to be shined on, because that's unconditional love. That's what it is. That's the nature of our hearts, to radiate this all-encompassing, all devouring, I guess, aspect of our mind. I found that if I look at my senses, or if I look at my mind or emotions, there's this aspect on the back end where it all fades. It's being projected on a screen. And once that projection has run its course, where does it go? And that devouring aspect has this non-rejection quality to it. That's not the right kind of word, but there's this taking it all in, taking it all in quality to it. And I think that's the biggest hint to the nature of that bodhicitta, or that enlightened heart aspect of reality. It's this ability to see the suffering, or see the bliss, and take it in without moving, by remaining still and just devouring it in emptiness. It really takes compassion, and it takes this non-aversion towards whatever is being experienced, whatever reality is. It's God too. And to reject God is to become caught up in the game. It's to become twisted in ego and mind again. The aversion of suffering is the cause of basically all of our life's woes. I like the metaphor. It's the anaconda who's been stabbed by a sword. Like it can't help but gnash at the blade. It wants to twist around the blade, and like it wants to fuck up that sword. But the more it fights against it, the worse it becomes. Like the more we twist up and push against our aversion, the worse our suffering becomes, because we make it real. We kind of like create this foundation of like making it more than what it actually is. So I think rain and sun and compassion and this unconditional love aspect are really the keys to liberation. It's that relief of like, oh, this isn't bad. This is okay too. I can do this. This is God too. Yeah, that's it. This is God too.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, that's perfect. That's beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, before we, that's everything. That's everything. And it reminds me too, from what you were saying earlier about being here now. I was at a Krishna Das retreat last year in New York, and someone asked him, he's like, I had this spiritual experience, and what should I do now? And Krishna Das was like, just live your life. You didn't make that experience happen. You can't choose to make it happen again. He's like, what's going to happen is going to happen. And
exactly.
It was beautiful because it was not giving the mind the answer it wanted, but giving truth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So we can
what
all
is it?
just go
Chop wood and carry water, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Dude,
Well,
this has been lovely.
You.
I'd love to do it again.
Thank you. Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.
Shanti.
So,
Ram Ram. Have fun.
Ram Ram.
I love you. Bye.